Hey, hey, hey. Time for another Out of This World story from rSpace. It's frustrating when people dive into relationships without being ready for them, like trying to start a fire with wet wood. Nothing's going to catch and everyone just ends up cold and frustrated. If you're not ready to take responsibility for your own stuff, then maybe the dating world isn't the place to be. Today on rSpace, do you believe in life after love? I surprised my cheating wife at her affair motel. I beat up her affair partner and made sure she lost her job. I know a lot of people might try to change my mind, but honestly, I think at this point I genuinely hate the idea of serious relationships, whether we're talking about marriage or dating seriously, because I've been through way too much crap in my life to want any more of what I've been through. I know there are good women out there, but I've never found any of the good ones. Genuinely, I'm tired of it. I don't mind a casual fling with someone, because at the end of the day, I still have needs, but I'm not going to invest any part of myself in anyone ever again. It's not worth it. I'm sorry for that little rant, but I really had to get that off of my chest. My marriage has fallen apart and it still hurts like hell. However, let me just give you a little insight into what I've had to go through in the past. And please don't mention anything about me being the common denominator, because if you know what I've been through, you'll know I did nothing but love wholeheartedly and try my best to be extremely understanding and amenable. My first relationship was all the way back in high school, and for the most part, I don't have hard feelings about what happened back then. We were all silly and young, though it still ended with my girlfriend falling for someone else and dumping me in a very emotionless way. That wasn't fun and messed me up for a bit, but I bounced back in what I still think was a relatively quick amount of time. My second relationship came all the way near the end of college, and I thought that dating a hardworking engineering student was going to be nothing but good, but nope. She still found the time to sleep with whoever really wanted to hop on the ride, and when I confronted her, she was extremely unapologetic about it. I think that's when mistrust of women started to brew in me. That mistrust grew completely when I got into a relatively short relationship after college. It was meant to be serious, but when I found out that she was still attached to her ex and messaging him asking when they could meet up, I felt like I was done with dating. I think my mindset changed entirely when I met Carla, who became my wife. I wasn't even trying to date her, but we met randomly at a supermarket. I was buying groceries and reading a box of cereal that I hadn't had before, and she commented telling me that I could never go wrong with that cereal and that she ate it nearly every day. I feel corny saying this now after what she's put me through, but I remember when I turned and saw her smile. It melted me. I hate that it still has a bit of a pull on me. That's part of the reason why I'm even less forgiving about the direction in which she took our relationship. Somehow, she ended up following me around the supermarket for the rest of my grocery mission, and it didn't even feel intrusive. By the end of it, she asked me for my number, and that's how we began to talk. Things started off friendly, with us going to the movies and playing video games together, but there was nothing romantic at the start. However, I think the more I liked her as a friend, the more I started to see her as more. I mean, despite my strong stance before, I started to feel like she would be the fix to my mistrust of women. What a mistake that ended up being, though it took a long time to figure that out. It was the next Valentine's Day when we both jokingly decided to hang out as single people. Then we kissed. I honestly can't say where it came from because the day still seems like a blur. Yeah, we started dating that day, and we dated for 4 years before I popped the question, because I felt like she had fixed all my misgivings. We've been married for 8 years now. Now, I'm 40 years old and divorced, but as much as it hurts, I think it is always best to find out the truth. I haven't for a moment wished that I was living a lie and that I didn't find out about what she was doing. So here's how it went. Carla works as a manager at a local car dealership, so her hours were later than mine, since I'd be off work around 5 p.m., but she was frequently there until 8 p.m. or 9 p.m. It wasn't bad though, since I loved spending that little bit of time by myself, especially the longer the marriage went on. Of course, working in a car dealership meant meeting so many people on a daily basis. Sometimes she came with stories about annoying customers, and sometimes it was stories about people who tried to hit on her. She was always very open about the things that happened during her workdays, so I think that added to me having very little suspicion about things. I think the moment things went downhill was on the day that she came home a little past 9 p.m. And while she usually just plopped down beside me and tell me how her day went, she just said a quick hi and then went to the bedroom. By the time I entered the bedroom a few minutes later, she was in the shower, which was definitely not the usual pattern. It was odd to me, but it's not like alarm bells went off in my head just because one night wasn't the way it was usually. However, over the next 2 months, I think that pattern must have happened about 3 or 4 times, and this was something that before then had never happened. When I tried to engage her on those nights, she just seemed different, like she had a lot less to say than usual, even when I pressed. I think it was at that point that I really started to sense that something might have been off. After 8 years of marriage, I just decided to ask her about it. Instead of going through her phone, according to her, things were just getting busier and busier as the year was coming to a close. So she was stressed out more, and they were closing later than usual. I could see how people might be making arrangements for cars as presents in December, so it made sense to me, honestly. I just tried to cheer her up and left it at that. As the good husband that I was, always trying to be, on one of those nights when I noticed she wasn't going to be around quickly, I decided to take her favorite Starbucks order to her as a little pick-me-up. On a whim, I bought a little bouquet for her. I wanted her to know that I recognized her being hardworking, and I really thought it'd be a pick-me-up. The only problem was that I got to the dealership and the place was closed. I sent her a message to ask her whether she was on her way home, because that was the only thing that'd make sense. Us passing each other at some point, but when I saw, "Nah, I'm still at work for now," and I knew that I was being lied to. The entire place was dark, and I doubted that there was anyone in there, even in the back rooms. So I sent another message and asked if she was making a sale, and she responded, "Yeah, just finishing up with a customer. The others are itching to go, so I'm trying to close this as quickly as possible." Yeah, it was more than evident at that point that I was being lied to, and like a flash, I realized that every other time that she had had to stay out late, she could have been a lie too. In fact, I was sure that they were lies, and that was confirmed when I returned home and she acted just like she did on those other nights. It was then that I decided I'd need to figure out what was going on. I knew that she'd never tell me the truth if I admitted that I caught her in a lie, especially because the first thing that jumped into my mind was cheating. It happened to me too many times in the past for me to think of anything else. I remember that I actually started to panic because I had been through women's drama and I really thought that I was going to be done with it. Eventually, when she went to sleep, the heavy sleeper that she is, I went straight into snooping. I grabbed her phone, went to the living room, and started looking through her gallery for messages, her notes, every single thing that I could access. It was when I got to her iMessage conversation that I found her talking to a guy saved as Steve. It caught my attention because it was one of the more recent conversations, and as soon as I opened it, there were way too many emojis being thrown around, hearts and all of that. I went straight to the beginning of the conversation to get an idea of how long they'd been talking, but it was only a few months. That started to make more sense since it was just a few months ago that I had started to notice that her behavior shift every so often. From the conversation, I was able to glean that he was a customer who had come into the dealership and he had asked for her number. I had no last name there or anything. I didn't even know how he looked. But after reading through, it was more than clear that they were sleeping together. Ever so often, he'd drop a motel and a room number, and the last 3 times, it was the same motel. They had even gotten a regular place for their fornication. To say I was pissed is an understatement. I genuinely felt like I would do something that would get me thrown in jail, and I wouldn't have had any regrets. The worst part is that very night, they had spoken about next time, and he mentioned that he'd be around on the Friday that week, which was in 2 days. He said he'd let her know the usual, and then there was a bunch of small talk. At that point, I was ready to lose my mind, but I wanted to do it in a very calculated way. With all the past trauma of women in my life, I felt this one was going to end me. Somehow, though, I was able to keep it all together. I just documented as much of it as I could, and then I left the house in the middle of the night for a walk to clear my head. The next morning, she acted like everything was dandy, which was driving me crazy since I knew what was going on. But if I was going to lose my mind on her, I wanted to do it at the very best moment, even if it involved me doing it at her dealership. That's not how things went in the end, however. Since our Mac at home is connected to her phone, I was able to look at her iMessages from there, and it was 2 days later that I finally saw Steve confirm a room number in the middle of the day. I took that as meaning that they were going to meet up that very night, and then she'd walk in acting all odd like she had been the last few months of our marriage. I didn't know what I was going to do about her cheating, but I knew I was going to confront her, and I was really hoping that when I decided to do that, I'd figure out what to say or do at that moment. I won't lie, I was really hoping that I'd get the chance to go physical with her affair partner, because I was genuinely filled with rage and it needed to come out. So, at night, I decided to take a drive to the motel that Carla was hooking up with this guy at, and all it took was a $20 bill for the desk person to point me out to the room that I was looking for. I guessed that this motel was the kind for drama of this kind in a very regular basis. I knew that she was inside too because I had passed her car on my way in. I really considered going back home as I stood in front of the door to the room. because I realized how everything was going to fall apart after the confrontation I was about to make. I didn't consider that for too long though, because there was too much resentment in me. So, I knocked on the door. I had to wait about a full minute after knocking a second time before a man who seemed to be in his early 50s or so opened the door. I asked him if he was Steve, and he said yes. I just lost it. I don't know. I think he was actually seeing the guy. Not that he was bad looking, but he was clearly older. That made me just lose my mind. So yeah, I swung at him, and it connected right in his jaw. He stumbled backward, but then he regained his footing and lunged into me, which took me down. Everything after that point was a proper blur. We scuffed for a bit on the ground, and I eventually heard a woman scream for Steve to stop. I even felt the woman tugging on my shirt, trying to pull me off of her man. Eventually, after the sight of a good amount of blood finally jolted me back to my senses, I stood up. No, not enough to worry about anyone dying, but enough for me to know that I had won. I think I dressed too conspicuously because it was only after Carla helped lift Steve off the ground that she said, "Who the hell are you, and what was that for?" She was turning as she said it, but I think that when she fully saw my face without me wrestling with Steve, she knew it was me. Her mouth dropped open and she covered it with both hands. I didn't even know what to say to her, and that's coming from someone who had recited a few options. "This is what you've been doing on those late nights, right? Looks like you're finishing up with the wrong customer here." And then I turned to walk away. She ran up to me and then followed me all the way to the parking lot, begging and begging to explain what was going on. She even dropped the iconic, "It's not what it looks like." It was exactly what it looked like. I knew that much at least. I would have never taken her back, but she had the chance to choose between me or him, and she chose wrong. I got back home, and I remember just falling into the couch in the living room. I felt like there was no energy left in me, and not even in a bad way. I felt satisfied, but very exhausted. I don't remember falling asleep that night, but I did, and I was woken up by her arriving back at home. The same way that I wasn't sure about what I was going to say when I confronted her at the motel was exactly how it seemed, and she didn't know what to say, because the moment she saw me, she just froze and stared. I didn't know what to say to her too, but eventually, before she had said anything, I told her to pack up her things and leave the house. It was only then that she broke down and started begging me, apologizing and trying to explain, but I honestly can't recall a single word that she said in the whole thing. I had tuned her out entirely. All I wanted was for her to get her things and leave, and thankfully, after trying to fix her mistake without a response from me, she eventually stood up and headed to the bedroom. In half an hour, she was out with a small suitcase of her belongings. She tried to talk to me before she left, but I had nothing to say. I was so hurt, and I hate to say it, but part of me wanted to give her the same beatdown that I had given Steve. The very next day, I contacted a divorce lawyer and I paid him right away. I needed to cut all ties with her. I needed to do it as quickly as I could. It was almost like being legally tied to her for any longer than I had to was doing me physical pain. When the time came to serve her with the papers, I made sure to park across the street from her dealership as the process server walked in. I asked the people at the front desk for her, and then when she walked out, I watched her get served. And on an actual whim, I got out of my car, entered the dealership as soon as the process server walked out, and then announced to the hearing of everyone, "You've been sleeping with customers, likely not just Steve. I want a divorce." She seemed shocked, and I think she was about to try and usher me out for damage control, but without even standing around for too long to savor the awkwardness, I was out. I felt better after that. From that point, we went into the divorce process, and that was annoying too. Her lawyers tried to get everything that they could, but with her infidelity clear as day, it was going to be hard for that. Yes, I worked at a job that paid well like hers, but she's always earned slightly more. I wanted to make sure that I got alimony, not that I needed it, and the house at the very least. Fortunately for me, when the divorce proceedings finally ended in court, since we couldn't come to an agreement, the judge awarded me the house, a minimum spousal support arrangement for the next 2 years, and she was able to keep her car and I kept mine. I would have loved things to be entirely in my favor, but things don't work out that way in the courts, so I was very happy with what I was able to get. To argue against the alimony, her lawyers revealed that she had been let go due to my petty actions at her workplace, but the judge was smart. She was let go because she was sleeping with customers, not because I made a scene. She was in the wrong from the very start, and she didn't have the right to play victim. The best part was that even though she had no job at the time, he didn't modify her alimony arrangement. The last thing that I did was to put her name online along with a full description of her deeds. I wanted to immortalize her in the worst way that I could. The next time an employer or future partner chose to search her name on the internet, I hoped that something related to what I had written would pop up. I didn't want her to move on so fast. This was 3 months ago, and she eventually found similar work, only at a used car place. The step down from a fancy dealership to that sparked a lot of joy in me. Honestly, I wish her the very worst in life, and I refused to be the bigger person. I really felt like I could trust women again, but apparently not. It is what it is, though. Just be vigilant, boys. That's all I can say. Wow. Getting laid and laid out in one evening. That's impressive. But for real, in all seriousness, OP, it's hard to keep opening yourself up when it feels like the outcome always seems the same. It's hard because you've never done anything wrong, OP. You've done your part of being the perfect partner, and yet you've been let down in ways no one should have to endure. That can definitely harden someone over time. We get it. So yeah, dating should be for those who are ready to date, not for the ones still playing emotional hide and seek. Take care of you, and don't let someone else's emotional immaturity mess with your peace. Is that the chance we take when we open ourselves up to people in love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And thank you for joining us today on rSpace. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. See you soon!